David Gantt's story wasn't the story of a mastermind criminal, nor was it the story of a typical outlaw. It was the story of an ordinary man, caught up in a dangerous mix of greed, love, and desperation. He was just a simple worker at Loomis Fargo, one of the biggest armored car companies in America. His job was straightforward: transporting money, securing vaults, handling the daily grind of cash flow. But behind the tired eyes of David Ghantt, a fire was slowly burning. He felt life was unfair. He was married, broke, stuck in a boring routine, watching money pass through his hands every day, but never really having enough to call his own. Day after day, David saw stacks of cash so big they could change a man's entire future. The temptation was always there. He was the guy standing at the gate of fortune, but locked out from ever entering. That temptation grew into an obsession. What if, just once, he grabbed it? What if he walked out of that vault, not as an employee, but as a millionaire? But big dreams don't work alone. Enter Kelly Campbell. Kelly was David's former co-worker, and more than that, someone he was deeply infatuated with. David had feelings for her that blurred the line between loyalty and obsession. When he opened up about his secret thoughts, about stealing money, Kelly didn't shut him down. Instead, she listened. Slowly, she introduced him to someone else, a man named Steve Chambers. Steve was greedy, cunning, and cold. Unlike David, Steve had no moral hesitation. He wanted the money, and he wanted it fast. The plan started taking shape. David had the key. He had the access, the trust of the company, and the courage. At least, that's what he thought. Steve would provide the brains and the contacts to launder the money. Kelly would be the bridge, manipulating David's emotions and making him believe this heist was not only possible, but meant to be. And so, in October 1997, the plan was set into motion. David was nervous, his heart beating so fast he could barely breathe. On October 4th, he stayed late at the Loomis Fargo facility in Charlotte, North Carolina. When the building was quiet, he made his move. The vault was right in front of him, towering, intimidating, holding more wealth than David had ever dreamed of. He opened it with the codes he knew so well and started loading cash into the Loomis armored van. Bag after bag, millions of dollars stuffed inside, until the van could barely hold more. He laughed nervously to himself, the absurdity of what he was doing hitting him in waves. By the time he was done, he had stolen nearly $17 million, one of the largest cash robberies in American history. Think about that number for a second. $17 million. If you're enjoying this unbelievable true story, don't forget to hit subscribe, because we've got even crazier real-life stories coming your way. Back to David. After filling the van, he drove off into the night, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He met with Kelly and Steve, unloading the mountain of cash. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. But money changes people, fast. Steve Chambers, the so-called brains of the operation, suddenly felt like he was the king of the world. He and his wife went from living modestly to spending outrageously. Fancy cars, expensive jewelry, a brand new mansion. Their small-town neighbors couldn't believe how quickly they had become rich. They were living like millionaires overnight. It didn't take long before their reckless spending caught the attention of the FBI. Meanwhile, David's role was to disappear. He fled to Mexico with a small cut of the cash, waiting for Steve to send him more money later. But in Mexico, life wasn't what David imagined. He was lonely, constantly looking over his shoulder, missing home. and completely dependent on Steve and Kelly. The dream was slowly turning into a nightmare. While David struggled abroad, Steve and his wife were drawing attention back home. The FBI noticed their sudden wealth. They weren't careful, and greed was eating them alive. Investigators began putting the pieces together. Surveillance footage clearly showed David moving money at Loomis Fargo that night. It was only a matter of time before the net tightened. But Steve had another idea. Why split the money with David when he could have it all? Steve decided David was a loose end that needed to be eliminated. He arranged for a hitman to travel to Mexico and kill David. The plan was simple: no David, no trail, and more money for Steve. But like everything else in this story, it didn't go as planned. The hitman failed. David survived. And more than that, David realized the people he trusted most had turned against him. Kelly, the woman he thought cared for him, was playing both sides. Steve, the man he thought was his partner, wanted him dead. The betrayal cut deeper than anything. Now stop for a second. If this story feels like a Hollywood movie, that's because it literally became one later on. But remember, this all really happened. And if you want more real-life stories that are stranger than fiction, hit that subscribe button right now. The FBI closed in. They raided Steve Chambers' lavish new home, uncovering piles of hidden cash stuffed into walls, boxes, and secret compartments. The evidence was undeniable. Kelly was brought in for questioning, and under pressure, the entire scheme began to unravel. Finally, David was caught in Mexico. He didn't resist. Maybe deep down, he knew this was inevitable. He had lived months on the run, fueled by lies and false promises. When the FBI brought him back to the United States, his face told the whole story. The adventure was over. David Ghantt was sentenced to prison, as were Steve and Kelly. Each paid the price for their greed. David admitted that he did it partly for love, partly for money, and partly because he thought he could beat the system. But the system always catches up. The Loomis Fargo heist went down in history as one of the most absurd yet fascinating crimes America had ever seen. Not because it was perfect, but because it was so flawed, so human. It wasn't a heist pulled off by professional masterminds. It was the work of an ordinary guy who made one extraordinary mistake, and of so-called friends who turned on each other the moment money hit their hands. And here's the lesson: fast money never lasts. David thought he was buying freedom, but all he bought was a ticket to prison. Steve thought he was untouchable, but greed exposed him. Kelly thought she could play both sides, but lies always collapse. Today, the story of David Ghantt is more than just a crime story. It's a warning. When you try to skip steps in life, when you let greed blind you, the ending is always the same: loss. But for us, sitting here years later, it's also one of the most thrilling true stories you'll ever hear. Imagine one man.
So what do you think?
Walking out of a
Was
bank
David
with
Ghantt a
$17
fool,
million
or was he just a
in
desperate
cash?
man who got caught
For a
up in the
moment,
wrong dream?
He felt like the
Let me
richest
know
man
in the
alive.
comments below.
But by
And
the
if
end,
you enjoyed this
he
story,
was just another
don't forget to
cautionary
subscribe.
tale. Because this channel is where you'll find more unbelievable real-life stories that will blow your mind.